Welcome to the Southern RAC. I'm Tammy Pearson. It's September 7th, 6 o'clock. We'll begin our meeting. I'd like to recognize those that are in the room, our board members, right?
RAC members, yeah.
Our RAC members. Craig Lobb, Gene Boardman, Verlin King. Oh, where's our names?
Chuck Chamberlain.
Chuck Chamberlain, sorry. Bart Batista, right? And Dan Fletcher. Do you need to know who's who? Or they need to introduce themselves?
We would have them introduce themselves, but this is okay.
Now you tell me. Not like I've ever been here before. We'd also like to recognize our board member online, Mr. Wade Heaton, Commissioner Wade Heaton. Thank you. Now, you want me to turn the time over to you?
We need to get it a motion on approval of the agenda and the minutes.
Okay. Apologies, I'm not a very good chairman, so Kevin's going to have to guide me. All right, I'll accept a motion or welcome a motion on approval of the meeting agenda and minutes.
Before we approve the agenda, I think we ought to at least state that there was a couple of items deleted from the agenda after we had received comments on those items. Apparently, those have been deleted and will not be heard by anybody or considered by anybody. And this doesn't reflect good on RAC and board process. I just wanted to make that statement about the agenda.
Okay, and Gene, that's correct, and I'll put those in context a little bit in my board update. So thank you.
I move we accept the agenda and the minutes.
I'll second.
Motion has been moved and seconded. Call for a vote or any discussion, right? Okay, call for a vote. Vote is unanimous. Okay. Okay, now we'll turn the time over to Kevin. He'll do the wildlife board update.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. At the last wildlife board meeting, if you remember, we did the fur bearer and trapping recommendations and the cougar recommendations were the two main agenda items. The board had similar discussions to what we did here in the RAC. The trapping and fur bear regulations passed without a lot of discussion. There wasn't much controversy there. There was a fairly lengthy discussion on the cougar recommendations in relation to whether we're going to allow people to harvest cougars that are collared, which is similar to the discussion we had here, and it went in the same two directions. Are we going to allow cougars to be cougars with collars to be harvested every place except for those 6 units in the central region, or were they going to preclude the harvest of collared lions statewide? And the board ultimately decided to well, let me read the motion. The motion was to prohibit the taking of collared lions with the use of hounds, excluding depredation take. So if we have a lion that's been involved in depredation of livestock, the rule doesn't apply, but they're prohibiting the taking of collared lions with the use of hounds for a period of 3 years. And that's the period of the study that we heard. So they went back and forth to discuss the pros and cons of doing it just on the units where the study's taking place versus statewide, and ultimately decided to do the closure statewide but put a 3-year limit on it. So, and then at the end of the meeting, and this was after our agenda for this meeting had already been sent out, there was discussion about the upcoming RAC meeting, and that's when the board And I think this was really some confusion that happened between our board chairman, as our previous chairman went out and Kevin Albrecht is now the new chairman. I think we had a little bit of confusion there, but on the what level of survey the board wanted to see prior to us issuing recommendations on regulating cameras, as the legislature asked us to do. So we were ready to do that based on a survey that we already had in this RAC meeting. The board directed us to pull that back and to conduct a more specific survey just on cameras. So Gene, although I think there's probably justifiably some frustration, in the end, we will have a recommendation that has a lot more public input backing it, because there'll be a specific survey that's done that's more specific to that issue, and that will be presented prior to whatever recommendations come on regulating cameras. So that's why we had to change a few of the items on our agenda after the agenda had been sent out. So any questions on the board update? Okay, if there's no questions there, I'll move into my regional update. First, we have a new director in the agency, Shirley, who was announced as the director, maybe 3 weeks ago now. Jay's a good friend of mine. I'm really optimistic about the way he'll lead our agency. Jay is a second generation DWR employee. His dad was a law enforcement officer and a non-game manager in the central region. He spent his career in the law enforcement section of our agency, but he has a master's degree in wildlife and range management from BYU, which is rare within our law enforcement ranks. So Jay's very well rounded that way. For instance, he's a very avid birder, extremely avid birder, and so he'll come with that sensibility as well to bringing in some of the more non-consumptive portions of our constituency, and I think Jay will be very good with it when it comes to that. To replace Jay, Wyatt Bubak has been named as our acting law enforcement chief for the time being, and there'll be I think the announcement to replace Jay as the chief will come out shortly, and they'll go through an interview process to find another law enforcement chief. So, like I said, I'm admittedly biased towards Jay. He did his master's degree on the same project I did my PhD on while we were both at BYU, and so I know him really well, and he's a good friend, and he's really a good person, easy to talk to, and tries to see things from all angles. So I think he'll be really good for us. So, any questions on our new director?
Yeah, he's director of what is of DWR?
Yeah, so he's the new director of our agency. So
okay, all right, and what's a birder?
He enjoys going out with and identifying birds and looking at birds. So
We don't hunt them.
he does hunt them. He's a very avid hunter. In fact, he's in Alaska right now on a moose hunt with his dad and his brothers. But he also enjoys that part of wildlife as well. So, but no, don't don't misconstrue that. He's very much a sportsman as well. So.
I remember asking that same question about a herper.
Let's not get into that one again. That one went south in a hurry when we were talking about that. Just to continue our updates from the region, with the drought impacts, I mean, things look pretty good right now. We are lifting our campfire restrictions on our DWR lands. The vegetation has responded. If you remember last time I said that the lower elevations still looked pretty rough, they've responded pretty good now. And I think wildlife will come off the mountain in pretty good shape this year, and there is some forage down in the lower elevations now. But I still want to emphasize that we don't reverse the effects of drought for 4 or 5 years with one good summer of moisture. There's still a lot that needs to happen to get us back in where we're really where we should be with moisture. And I'd ask Dan and Chuck if they have anything to add from the land management standpoint.
I think I just echo that. In our field office in Cedar City, seems like we've had pretty widespread moisture overall, but a lot of places it came really fast and had significant runoff and pretty extreme erosion. And there are places that the rain didn't do a lot of good, but we have had a really good green up on some warm season grasses and some recovery there. But like you say, we definitely need some more and are really hopeful for a good winter.
Yeah, that's the same thing I would say. It's been good, but we need more, and we need a good winter. That's what we need.
Okay, I agree. And then from the agricultural side, Craig or Verlin, anything you'd add to that?
I'd just say I talked to some of those people out north that the water runoff and washed out the railroad tracks, and he said, they got 5 or 6 inches of rain there in an hour or so, but it only went in about 2 inches. So that's the biggest problem, is that when it came, a lot of places it came too fast. And out in the valleys where it was able to settle in was okay, but in the mountains, a lot of it came too fast to soak in.
Yeah, and I'd probably mention that the drought was so severe early that as a veterinarian and a rancher, I expect the conception rate, the pregnancy rate this fall is going to be lower than what we would want for sure, but that's what I'm expecting. And yeah, even though we've got some good grass now, and the cows are gaining and the calves are gaining, it's going to back the calving off probably 2 or 3 months at the least.
So Berlin, that's a question, since we've got a light agenda, if you don't mind, a question that I've had: how long does it take an animal let's take a deer, for instance, that's been in a nutritional deficit to make up that ground and get back to where they're at or above average if they're on good feed?
Well, it won't take very long if they're on good feed. And I've been surprised on the livestock end of it, how thin some of these moderate frame cows that will breed back, even though they're pretty thin, but it's a concern for all the ranchers this year. I expect instead of calving in March and April, I'm probably going to be calving more in May. So, and if I'll start preg checking a lot of herds from here on out, and if they're a month along, which is as early as I can tell them with my ultrasound, they're going to be calving the end of May, 1st of June, and in Wayne County, we have to have them bred up early before you go on the spring ranges, because they're typically vast amount of acres. It's hard to get the bulls where the cows are to breed, and so and they're not typically real good forage at that time. So
But with our deer herd, that we're probably the most concerned about right now, where breeding is going to take place in November, would you suspect that the does will be able to make up that deficit and maybe be in pretty good body condition by the time breeding takes place in November, from what you've seen?
well, I'm sure. I expect your deer herd are going to be in good shape, the ones that are left. So
The ones that are left is a good caveat there, because we're down for sure.
I was just going to say, on the ranges that we've had, and we cover a lot of country, spend a lot of time out there in the hills, and I have seen very few fawns with the does that we see. You'll see groups of 4 or 5 does and not a single fawn with them. But I think right now that the does are looking better. They seem to be perking up a little bit, and hopefully, they got some good grass this fall. Come November, they'll be in better shape.
Just to wrap up that discussion, and then something I probably should have included in my board update, we did add additional cow elk tags in response to drought conditions around the state. I think it was just over 1,000. Riley, does that sound right? It was about 10 or 15% increase. If you look at it statewide in cow elk permits that we will be offering up to try to make sure that we're not damaging habitat. So moving on with my aquatic section, probably the main thing to talk about, there's going to be a meeting this Friday up at Duck Creek Village at 6 o'clock to gather public input on a proposal that we have to treat Navajo Reservoir with rotenone and kind of reset that system. It's been overcome by Utah chubs, and we need to reset Navajo Reservoir and go back in with a different suite of species there. Our fisheries in general, we've lost some, both due to low water levels in some areas, and then due to flooding in some of our small streams where we've just gotten too much silt. So fisheries have been heavily impacted by the weather conditions on both ends, but our places like Otter Creek and Minersville, they're holding on okay. The additional harvest that we've done there will make a difference in increased survival rates for what's left and help our recovery be quicker. We were afraid we were going to completely lose the fisheries in those two reservoirs in particular. It looks like, if things stay at least okay for the next 6 weeks, we'll probably be able to pull some fish through. And those are our two of our larger fisheries. Penguich has been okay through the summer, but Otter Creek and Minersville we were really concerned about, and we will be able to maintain some of the fish in both of those reservoirs is what we're anticipating right now. With the wildlife section, we'll be doing CWD collection on the Monroe, Mountain Dutton, and Plateau units this summer. So we'll be looking for as much help as we can get from sportsmen there, so we can continue to monitor and make sure we don't have CWD in this part of the state. We'll have our condor check stations taking place on the Zion unit. As was mentioned, our fawn survival is low across the southern region. Probably the lowest number we have right now is on the beaver unit, which I believe is at 7% fawn survival. So we're essentially just going to have a couple of age classes that are going to be missing from our deer herd, which will make things lean for a few years. Hopefully we can reverse that trend. We'll begin
That fawn survival, you're talking about the fawns of last spring or the fawns of this spring?
This is the fawns that were born last year. So this is the 18-month survival. So the ones that were collared in December coming back through the next December. Is that correct, Vance? Okay. We'll begin chucker releases September 18th through the 20th for the youth hunt, and then they'll continue with some releases through the chucker hunt. And there's a map on our website that shows the locations of when and where the chucker releases will take place. From our law enforcement section, the archery hunt's underway. Violations have been about average for what we expected. Deer hunters have, from the interactions with our law enforcement guys, have been pleasantly surprised with the quality of bucks they've been seeing. I think that's largely because we don't have a lot of yearling bucks. So if they're seeing a buck, they're probably seeing a 2.5 or a 3.5-year-old buck. Elk hunters are having some success, but it varies across the different units. And then, as I mentioned last time, we're short-staffed in our law enforcement section right now, but despite that, we've been able to keep up with the calls as they've come in so far. We'll see if we maintain that through the any weapon hunts. With our outreach section, kokanee are starting to show up in Twin Creeks up at Fish Lake. There's 2 different spawning times up there, and so we're planning a viewing event. It'll be sometime in late September or early October. It'll come on quick when we know we have a lot of fish in the system up there, and we'll invite people to come up and we'll get the word out on that through Facebook and other issues. We conducted our last drawing for the tagged perch that come out of Fish Lake, and we gave away a fly rod and some gift certificates and donations from the lodges up at Fish Lake this morning to some people that turned in tagged perch from out of Fish Lake. And then lastly, we had a mountain goat viewing event up on the Tushers in August. Went well. We had about 70 people attend and found a fair number of goats. Is that right, Phil? So that's kind of what I had to report. Any questions? Anything that I didn't cover that you would like me to? Okay, if not,
I would like a personal invite next time you go looking for goats.
Phil, did you catch that? There you go. Riley had a couple of things he wanted to clarify there. So,
Okay, so our next agenda item is the once in a lifetime species recommendation. And we'll turn the time over to Riley Peck, the once in a lifetime program coordinator.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get going. The division has made a commitment to the RACs and boards to try and balance our RAC and board schedule as much as possible. In an effort to do that, we have moved our once in a lifetime species recommendation to September, which is one of our lighter agendas, and pulled that from November, which is traditionally one of our heavy agendas. The challenge, or one of the consequences with that, is we were still collecting data for our once in a lifetime species, specifically our goats in the northern region. We just wrapped up our flights with that and unfortunately had a smaller count than we would have expected or hoped for. As a result, we'd already made our recommendations and we would like to adapt that and give you something else to consider. The northern region would like to recommend not having a non-resident hunt for the Chalk Creek Camas Uinta goat area. It is on the RAC packet and it was described in the presentation as including a non-resident hunt, but after our counts come in, we anticipate recommending a lower amount of permits than would allow for a non-resident in our plan. So we would hope for that potentially being a second or a separate motion aside from the body of the division recommendations. Mike, if you wouldn't mind, on another note, it was pointed out in the central region that I had made a clerical error. In the presentation, we had described a bison change to hunt boundaries on the Book Cliffs. And in the presentation, it is accurate, the map is accurate, but in the RAC packet, I have made the clerical error of calling it the Little Creek South versus Bitter Creek South and Bitter Creek versus Little Creek, and I've made a mistake there. And I hope you can understand how easy that was for me as I was going over that we have a Little Creek South and a Bitter Creek unit. The map is accurate in the RAC packet. The RAC packet did have a couple name changes. So just to be clear, if you are voting for the balance of the recommendation, it would include this hunt table. The map is accurate, but these are all the hunts that would be included in that. As he is pulling that up, I hope that clarified the two housekeeping items. And with that, Madam Chair, that is all that I have.
Okay, thank you.
questions from the RAC?
Questions from the RAC?
Go ahead. I've got a couple of questions. I see that some of the mountain goat hunts are 80 days long. I see that days of field for goat hunters where there are about 5 days. And do we really need 80 days to take 2 goats off from Mount Dutton?
That's a good question. And traditionally, if we were to look at season dates with a lot of the species that we hunt across the state, you'd see a much shorter season date. Once in a lifetime species get managed differently. They're managed for 100% success. And therefore we try to give the most amount of time that we can. With mountain goats, a lot of time the hair, the fur is the trophy or the desire, and we don't get the longer hair at some of the elevations until later in the season. But sometimes later in the season, you run the risk of running into weather and not being able to, get into the areas that you most likely need to harvest a goat. And so in an effort to just make them accessible and give everybody as good a chance as possible as harvesting them, we give as liberal a season date as we possibly can.
Okay. Another question on the Bitter Creek, on the Book Cliff, and on the Henry Mountains. It looks to me like the buffalo are being pursued for about over 60 days, pretty much of straight hunting. So, what's your feelings on that with buffalo? Can there be too much straight hunting, or are they pretty resilient to it, or what?
Assuming, are you asking the question, does too much pressure have a negative impact on the buffalo in the Book Cliffs or the Henry Mountains? Did I get that question correct?
Well, no, I'm not so much concerned with how much pressure at a time, but pressure, the length of time that they're pressured.
Okay. Again, that is a good question. One of the challenges that we have is our desire not to negatively impact the animals or wildlife that we have and that we hunt. At the same time, we have the obligation and the challenge to try and manage to a population objective and manage to a herd size that is appropriate for the landscape and the management plan. Another reason for the length of our season dates, and specifically our boundary change on this one, is to allow us to put the adequate pressure to get the harvest that we need and not negatively impact the bison. And so I guess the short answer is yes, we feel like we've reached that balance. We'll continue to monitor that and hope that we have done so.
What meeting is it that we have where we do talk about the numbers? It's not the.
Right now is just trying to put hunts on the books and give us a place to apply, and we will bring forth hunt permit recommendations in the winter. The November RAC will still be boundary and season dates for deer and elk. It'll be the winter that we will do all of our permit numbers. I believe the February, March.
Yeah, the
RAC and board
March,
schedule.
April is when we'll do the permit numbers. Sorry.
All right. And you're working on a new bison plan. When do you expect to bring that before the RAC?
I hope sooner rather than later. I was able to participate in the meeting that we had just a few weeks back. I felt like we made really good progress with that, and there was really good conversation. And so I still think there's some work to be made or to be done, but hopefully in the next few months, we will be bringing forth the bison plan for the Henry Mountains.
So are you hoping to have the plan in place before permit recommendations?
That is the hope. That will largely depend on how quickly the committee moves and what we get done, but that is our goal at this point.
Okay, questions from the audience?
On the herds that we're seeing out there, you guys brought it up that the fawns aren't there. There was a biologist up the other day who was putting a guzzler in that told us that they had lost 80% of the fawns this year. So we got 2 years. Is there a, I'm a dedicated, I'll give you my tag back tonight. If we can do something to help, we got kids coming along that want to hunt. I've shot some deer. I'd give it back gladly if we could reduce the numbers and get something back for the kids.
So that's not specific to any of our agenda items tonight, but I'll respond just quickly. We're doing everything that we can. We've got our habitat projects. We've got water projects. We're more aggressive on predators right now than we ever have been. We've reduced deer tags by 25% over the last 2 years. What we need now is Mother Nature to cooperate, and we need normal weather patterns and moisture, and we will see our deer respond. We saw this cycle in the early 2000s, and then in 2013, 14, and 15, we had a lot of deer, and now we're back in the lower end of the cycle. I hope that we come back out of it sooner rather than later. But in response to your question, we're doing everything we can. We need a more normal moisture regime, and we'll be back into deer.
I'll make a little comment there as well. We had this discussion with my family on our hunts, and teach the kids and the grandkids and whatever, you don't have to fill your tag. Let's go have a family thing and do our thing and leave the deer on the mountain. I got plenty of meat in the freezer. I don't need to do it just to say you did it. Bring the sportsman out in you and raise your kids that way too. Okay, comments from the rack. Seems how I beat you to the punch. Okay, seeing no comments, I will accept a motion.
And just a reminder, Riley's requesting 2 motions on this. One specifically to deal with the goat hunt on the Uintas, and then you can pass the balance of it after that if you agree with everything else.
I'll make that motion to non-resident tag on the northern goat unit.
So to clarify, is that just for 1 year? Just for 1 year, okay.
I'll second it.
So we have a motion to eliminate the non-resident tags on the Uintas for 1 year on the mountain goats.
On that one specific.
On that one specific, so I didn't write down the unit.
Riley, what was the unit so we can include that in the motion?
The Chalk Creek Camas unit.
You got that,
The second was
Berlin? So do you want to repeat that back?
Sorry. So the motion is to eliminate the non-resident mountain goat permit on the Chalk Creek Camas unit for the 2022 hunting season.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, I'll accept the vote. Call for a vote. You want them individual ayes, or how do you want that?
Yeah, if you'll just do a roll call.
Okay, Bart Batista?
Aye.
Jean?
Yes.
Got it.
Okay.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Okay, I don't need to vote. I don't get a vote.
You don't need to vote.
Okay. So I would say that was unanimous.
Yep.
Motion passes.
And now if we could get a motion on the remainder, unless there's anything else specific that the RAC would like to address.
Okay, I'll accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the rest of the once in a lifetime packet as proposed.
No second.
Okay, motion by Chuck, second by Craig to accept the remaining items on the once in a lifetime packet. Close enough?
Yep. Okay, so let's do it this way. You just call their names and I'll fill it in later.
Okay, Bart,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Chuck,
Yes.
Verlin,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
and Dan.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimous.
So now we need to go into the fishing, 2022 fishing recommendations.
Be really handy if I had an agenda right here.
I have one for you right here. Anyway, it's not on there. It's the wrong agenda.
Okay,
2022 fishing recommendations.
so are we having any kind of a presentation on that or
It was
discussion?
just the presentation that was online. So we're,
Okay,
I guess we will begin with questions from the RAC. And we have Richard Hepworth online. And probably, I don't see, if we have any questions, we would address them to Richard.
okay, so RAC members, is there any questions for Richard on the fishing?
Just a reminder, it was all to do with Bear Lake in the northern and a community fishery in the northern region. So
So no questions?
Yeah, Richard, we can't let you off the hook too easy, so we got to ask you at least one question. So, it said in the packet that there was 60% of the fish in Bear Lake, or at least the cutthroat, were now wild stock. Is that what I understand from that?
I'll do my best here. I was hoping Randy would be on to address these, but yes, that's what I understood as well.
Okay, and so they're just comfortable being able to harvest those. They're not concerned that we could overharvest the wild brood, right?
Exactly. They feel like their numbers are in good shape.
Okay. And then there was a pond there, and my understanding is they were asking for one more year to produce more bluegill and more bass, and give them one more year to spawn. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Nothing? Okay, any statements, right, or comments?
sorry, Madam Chairman, I missed a step. And that's the public, the online public comment. We didn't have a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was the one thing you did have on my list.
But on this agenda item, we had 50% of the public that strongly agreed. And then we had about 50% that either strongly disagreed or were neither agreed nor disagreed. We only had 4 comments, so it was pretty easy to split it into 25 percentiles. So, and there weren't any written comments on this agenda item or the previous one.
Okay, so any comments from the RAC?
Both these items seem to be pretty well thought out. I think we can go along with both of them.
Oh, okay, comments from the public? Nope, okay, good. I will accept a motion then.
Come on, don't be shy. We need a motion.
make a motion to recommend approval of the 2022 fishing recommendations as presented.
Okay, motion by Bart to accept the recommendations for the 2022 fishing season. Do I have
I'll
a
second.
second by Dan? I'll call for any comments or discussion. Okay, we will take the vote. Bart,
Yes.
Gene,
Yes.
Chuck,
Yes.
Berlin,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Okay, vote is unanimous. Passed.
Yes, that passed unanimously. And then the last thing on the agenda was the round-tailed chub informational item about the prospects of making that a sport fish. And we do have somebody here from our native aquatic section that can help answer any questions if you have any on that. We won't need to take a vote on that, but if anybody has questions on that informational presentation, we can address those.
I do have a couple of questions on that one. I've, in my travels, and the chub conversation comes up once in a while. How many varieties of chub is there in Utah? And isn't a chub, and it's not really like, it's not a special fish?
Well,
And Eric, if
that's kind of what.
if you'd introduce yourself first.
Oh yeah, my name is Eric Woodhouse. I'm a native aquatics biologist in the southern region. One of my main responsibilities is I handle the 3 species conservation in the southern region, of which the round-tailed chub is one of the 3 species. So they're an imperiled fish species that we've been managing under a conservation agreement since I think about 2002. And so in the southern region, really the only area where round-tailed chub exists is the Escalante River drainage. It's a pretty remote area, and you know, I guess our jobs as fisheries managers is to conserve and protect that population, but you know, transitioning it into a sport fish is to also, you know, increase and expand fishing opportunities for our constituents, the public. So that's kind of where we're going with this. As far as how many, you know, chub species there are in Utah, you know, there's the round-tailed chub. I mean, there's many endangered ones. There's humpback chub, round-tailed chub, you know, Utah chub is one, and there's probably a few other in the Colorado River drainage. They are, you know, we hear people call them trash fish, you know, stuff like that, but they are a very unique species, and you know, and they're native to the state, so they play an important part in the ecosystem as well. So I don't think I named all the chub species, but there are several. So.
And Eric, another question from a non-aquatics biologist: Are they all from the same genus of
They're
chub?
from the Gila genus?
Okay.
Yeah, Gila.
I have a question, more of a comment. When you said fisheries management is about conserving the species, isn't fisheries management about conserving or managing the stock of what you're going to fish?
Yeah, it's about conserving and managing the stock as well. You know, we step in to manage the species to ensure, you know, they're around. They play an important part, like I said. And so with managing under conservation agreement, it really helps to keep the control of the species within the state, you know. And really our job is to mitigate any factors that would, you know, prevent them from being, or not having them being listed under the Endangered Species Act. So that's where the status of the species is at currently.
So if I were going to go fishing for these round-tailed chubs, now where would I go? The Escalante River, or are there other places besides?
In the southern region, the Escalante River is the only population we have. The population is reproductive. We see recruitment in the species. So
it's, you know, in the Escalante River, the population is doing quite well.
So do they taste good?
Well, I've never personally eaten one. They're already designated as a sport fish species in Arizona. So
Okay.
from what I hear, they're a flaky white fish. They have an easily removable Y bone, and yeah, from what I hear, they taste pretty well.
Do they get big?
The
don't
ones
know
in the
much about
Escalante River, they can get up to about 12 to 16 inches. In the main stem Colorado River, they can get a little bit bigger. So the Escalante River is a smaller stream, and so the size of the fish in that drainage isn't huge, but they do put up a good fight. You know, they're similar to a trout. They like to hang out in eddies and pools adjacent to swift water. So when you do hook into one, they'll seek refuge in that swift water, and what I hear, put up a pretty good fight. So they are sporting species, and you know, people do like to catch them.
Okay.
So Eric, if I'm not mistaken, you just spent 10 days in the Escalante drainage.
We've done some pretty extensive work doing some distributional surveys in the Escalante River. So if you guys, I don't know if you're familiar with that drainage, but it's really remote. It's, you know, very limited access. And so to get in and monitor the lower section, we had to do about a 50-mile backpack trip over an 8-day period, going in with all of our equipment and sampling downstream and coming out through Coyote Gulch. So yeah, my job's really fun sometimes, and well, a lot of times it's really fun. But yeah, we get to do really cool things like that, you know, see some really remote areas, and we sampled some areas of the Escalante River that have never been sampled before. So the UDWR has done the most extensive, you know, distributional work of round-tailed chub to date. So it's been quite an accomplishment.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, what's their current status?
So they're currently a species of greatest conservation need. So they're managed under a conservation agreement. So they, as far as sport fish are concerned, it's a prohibited species. You're not allowed to catch them or really even handle them. So they're protected under that. They're not endangered. They're just what we call a conservation species. So moving them into, you know, a sport fish would open up, you know, get rid of that prohibited species status where you could catch and harvest them.
So now you're not even supposed to throw a hook at them.
I mean, if you were to catch one, say you're out trout fishing and you were to catch one, if you released it, I mean, I think that's okay. But as far as now being prohibited, you're not really supposed to target them. So that they're protected because just their populations have been dwindling, you know, over the past, you know, 50 or so years.
And Eric, isn't part of the objective here of making them a sport fish to leverage the angling public? There's a lot of examples that I'm familiar with on the terrestrial wildlife side: wild turkeys, white-tailed deer, swans that have been brought back through the conservation efforts that have been funded because of sport hunting. And I assume that this is a similar effort to try to bring the sporting public, the angling public, behind the conservation efforts for round-tailed chub and have a similar success story. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, by moving this to a sport fish, it'll shed a spotlight on the species, which will aid in our conservation efforts and provide, you know, increase and expand fishing opportunities for the public. It'd be managed a lot like how cutthroat trout are managed in the state, where, you know, in some areas, you know, based on population, you can manage where you can have catch and release in some areas, take in some other areas, and it just would bring more funding to the table, as well as, you know, a spotlight to the species to help aid in our conservation efforts and to provide, you know, another sporting species to the public. And really get people into these, you know, majestic desert streams and rugged canyon country that where they might otherwise not, you know, venture. It just gives a unique opportunity for sport fishing.
And it looks like we do have Randy on now. Randy, is there anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
No, I think that was covered pretty well. I apologize. I thought the meeting was at 7. So. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of it.
So the Escalante dumps into Lake Powell. Are they in Lake Powell?
So yeah, that's, they're in the main stem Colorado River, which, connects to the Escalante, or Lake Powell. So yeah, they range from, the Escalante River upstream into the Green River, a lot of the major tributaries of the Colorado River. So in the southern region, the only population that we have is in the Escalante River.
Any other questions? Eric drove all the way up from St. George, so we had to get him. We had to get him on camera.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, is that the end of our agenda?
That is the end of our agenda.
So next meeting, right? Do we need to talk about that date?
The next meeting is scheduled for November 16th. So this will be our regular large agenda. It's right now scheduled to be in Cedar City. We took a vote at our last meeting to have all of our meetings start at 6 o'clock. And so that's what we're planning as of now, November 16th at the same location at the DNR building in Cedar City.
So it's 6 o'clock, not 5
Not
o'clock.
5 o'clock. It
So
is 6 o'clock. Yep.
bring a midnight snack.
We could probably provide that if we need one.
Okay, so we don't need a motion to adjourn, do we?
I don't think we technically need a motion to adjourn. Is everybody satisfied with our meeting? If so, we can call it a night. Thank you.
Okay, meeting adjourned.
You need a gavel.